So hi everyone, I'm Dianna with Living on the Fault Lines, a corner of the internet where I'm talking about healing after loss and including the very tragic loss of suicide, which is not talked about very much these days. And I'm looking at how we can bring in other ways of thinking into this healing arena and introducing different kinds of energy because it's a very dark and scary place. And I found myself here 5 years ago in the aftermath when my husband took his life. And as the mother of 3 young children, at the time, it was terrifying. And I really have spent the last 4.5 years trying to find a way to create a better legacy. And so today I'm really excited to be talking to Karen Winter. Hi, Karen.
Good morning.
Good morning. Karen is an author, speaker, and EFT practitioner. And her intention is to help individuals heal from emotional pain and move into their highest vision of themselves. Through EFT, she's able to help people release negative emotional blocks, fears, and phobias, as well as physical pain. Karen is a relationship facilitator and helps individuals and family create peaceful and fulfilling relationships. She teaches concrete tools and techniques to take you back into your relationships and alter the dynamics into positive creation. She's the author of What Would Love Do Now?, which has been adopted by therapists and spiritual practitioners as a way to heal from separation and learn from the deeper meaning of relationships. So welcome, Karen. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. Now, I discovered you, I know you practice EFT, but I discovered you through more of the breath work end of things, which was a really fabulous experience for me. And so I wanted to kind of share with people what that is and what that looks like and how someone might use that in the aftermath of, healing with a suicide to bring some light and, make this experience not so heavy. So maybe we could talk a little bit about the breath, which I know for me, when I first, in the first few weeks after everything happened, I really started to notice that I was only breathing to about here, to my clavicles. And I became really fascinated with this, understanding as I went and found you and other breath practitioners of really learning how powerful the breath is in bringing healing into the body and, what that can mean. And it's a tool that is literally right under our nose that we can use. So I'd love it if you would kind of share, some stuff about yourself and what your philosophy is, and then let's go into the breath.
Certainly. Well, I'll share with you that years ago, even going through divorce was a traumatic time for me in my life, and fear was a big part of that. Fear of change, fear of what does this mean, what will happen, how will my children and I survive and deal with everything, what will this relationship be. So on all parts, fear was a big part of it. You're describing too of the trauma of losing someone to death, and then the circumstances with which that unfolded can add more fear. And that can stop the breath immediately. Just like when we might almost be in an accident and we stomp on the brake, the breath stops, we clench, and everything is right there up in the chest. And it takes a moment to remind the body and remind ourselves, okay, everything's okay, and to breathe again, to be here, to commit to be in the body, be here on this earth, and allow life to move through, allow the energy to move through. Mm-hmm. So the first mental response and then physiological response is stop everything. And we clench and we stop breathing. So when you described how you realized you were only breathing to your clavicle and just these short little shallow breaths, it locks us in this pattern of thought and then also feeling. Because the thoughts are all creating the feelings. And that feeling is being invested in the physical body. So we might hold our shoulders up, we might lock our chest, our bellies might feel tense. We can even tense in our bottoms where we're standing and we're clenching like this because we're just holding on so tightly. And then that will affect the organs, that will affect the musculature, that will affect even our bones at a certain point. So what we're dealing with is moving into the consciousness of breath work is allowing a healing where we're actually releasing what we've lived, what we've embedded into our physical cells that are having a reaction and holding it all in. It's just like if you have ever had any deep tissue work and you notice they'll work in certain areas and it might evoke something, it might bring something up, and suddenly you have tears and you're thinking, why are you massaging my chest or my middle back and why am I experiencing tears? It's realizing, as they're going into that arena, you could go into a cellular memory literally of something that happened when you were little. something you might feel bad about, something you might feel guilty about, especially being in the middle back. So with breath work, it's a tremendous healing tool in that it's on all three levels. It's on the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual. And so the breathing is actually allowing us to go into the inner layers of what we've experienced through the emotions. It's also clearing that energy out of the physical body. That's why there are so many physical affectations that you feel when we do breath work, especially the first few times when we've lived through a trauma like what you've lived through, a divorce, an ending of a relationship, anything that can feel like it's a huge shift and it's brought up fear, brought up that kind of clenching, like I'm not sure I'm safe to live this. Breathing is going to open up the pathway to new patterns, even neurologically, to experience that event.
So just so we can clarify, so when you have an experience, particularly something that is so traumatic, the cells have the memory of it, in essence, right? I mean, they're this experience, and because we never really properly, this is my layman's understanding of it, but we never properly probably process it, right? And so it gets somewhat stuck or frozen in that place, kind of awaiting a healing, awaiting, maybe this awakening with breath work or EFT or whatever it is you decide to do. But I think, because I didn't really understand it, and particularly the first time that I went through it, and I know we'll talk about this, the tetany thing where you get frozen because there's so much of that. But just that feeling, the pain is really these emotional memories that have been stored in your body, right?
Exactly, and they're exiting through the limbs. So the first experience, the limbs probably feel like they weigh 100 pounds each, and you can't lift them at a certain point. It's because all of that heavy energy that we've encapsulated and we've held on to, all of the heaviness of all the emotions. We've had fear, we've had pain, we've had sadness since we've been in these bodies. We might have had some depression. We might have had feelings of hopelessness. There can be a lot that we have experienced once we get into these bodies. And there's a record of everything we've ever experienced in the body. Once we're breathing, we are allowing that energy, even just through the lightness and the flow of taking in the lightness of oxygen, which is receiving life, which is claiming to be here, which is even allowing ourselves on the elemental level of receiving. Because oftentimes we have a doubt and fear that we're actually not worthy and deserving of receiving.
And well, I think that's a really big piece of this whole suicide discussion, the worthiness, and I think that's a wound that many of us carry. I've spoken of it in some other interviews. I think it's a wound that most of us carry, and the suicide experience intersects that for a lot of people, and so you even shut down more, don't you? There's kind of a real sense of retracting, and the idea of abandoning your body, when you stop breathing. And you talk a little bit more about why that is. It because the bodies hold so much pain, and when we breathe, we're feeling it. I mean, there's sort of a sense of. I remember having a sense of being outside of my body, literally, sort of floating outside my body.
Right. When we're born into these bodies, this is the only consciousness that we live every day. So we get so trapped in this is all there is. My feelings, my thoughts, and if they don't feel good, then it really does feel like a trap. So what you experience in breathwork, and this is why it is a healing on all three levels, is because you'll have that physical response of letting go of this energy. And depending on where we are in our healing, you can feel just undulations of energy physically, where you just feel it moving and flowing. You can feel that heavy, energetic tetany, where we're letting go of trauma and pain. You can feel a lightness of just floating outside the body as well. Mm-hmm. But the other level is why you felt even a movement of shifting outside your body was on the spiritual level. You saw that there was something beyond what just your physical experience was. The breath can take us into different layers of consciousness. And so there was a part of you that knows, I'm not this body. There's a part of you that knows, I'm not this whole experience. But how much we engage with that part of ourself, that higher self that's witnessing everything, that knows everything's going to be okay, so oftentimes can be very small. Mm-hmm. With a pathway of breath, you get to actualize that higher part of yourself that says, I'm the witness and everything is okay. Even holding ourselves with compassion for what we've lived, holding others in compassion for what their choices might have been, including your husband's choice. You can expand out in this different way rather than feeling small and trapped and powerless, which oftentimes can make us look at others as you are the one who's rendered me powerless. And then that can be harder to have the compassion, the understanding, and that expansion that happens in breath work, or that happens when we access that higher part of ourselves. So in breath work, you're getting to new levels of consciousness within the self that have always been there, but we haven't always found the pathway to access them, to allow ourselves to bring our shoulders down and feel like, again, it's okay. I love. Even though this has happened, I love. Even though this has happened, I feel compassion and understanding for why, or for all the beings in this whole experience. But if we just stay in our mind is on a very small track normally that was not original to yourself at birth. Our minds about certain things, which is what we'll lead into now, is some cultural beliefs about even the aspect of suicide. We have been taught certain mores and values about it that aren't necessarily original to yourself, that aren't necessarily loving and accepting of this experience. So we have judgment around it. We've been taught judgment. And the judgment is the first thing that stops the flow of the loving heart. So we get locked into, there can be shame around it, embarrassment, taboos. It's not okay to talk about, it's not okay to do. Clearly, most of the religious, even if we are not brought up in a religious practicing family, those mores sink into most of the cultural values in this country, that somehow it's a sin. How many times have you heard it's a sin? You'll go to hell if you do this.
Right.
Those things we've heard since we were little, and just in hushed little whispers, and no one really talks about it. So when people have that experience of someone in their family or someone that they know, maybe even a friend that has had that experience or chosen that experience, it seems very unsafe to talk about and process. So therefore you feel that feeling of you're stuck in it. There isn't anywhere to move it, because there really isn't a safe place to talk about it and let it go and find out, how do I feel about this, and how do I bring this in, even into my heart, and keep my heart open to what this person's choice was, and that I'm still okay and that person is still okay. Yeah,
that's such a big piece, I think, for people to. It's something that I really advocate is, really spending some time. I think that a suicide comes along and sort of sweeps your life away with it, and people don't really stop and say, what do I really believe about suicide? What does it mean to me? And even more importantly, because suicide, as far as I know, is really the only form of death where it becomes a narrative about the people left behind. Bad mommy, bad wife, bad whatever. And people do, I think, really need to honor themselves in this experience and stop and say, well, what are my fears around this, and what do I fear it says about me, and is that true? And sort of explore those different areas, which I think doing the breath work does. I mean, I can speak from experience of having worked with you and also a few other practitioners. It does really open you up to being able to have that compassion and see that someone made a choice for a variety of reasons that most of us will never really truly understand. And there's that important piece to understand that people, we don't know every single aspect of a person. We don't know, really, at the end of the day, all of their pain and what they really had going on inside them. And I think that's hard for our society to accept, that we can't control everything, that we can't fix everything, that people are going to die, and they're going to choose to die, and they're going to die of illness. And at some point we have to step back from all that, don't we?
We absolutely do, because there is no control. There are no guarantees. Even if you and your husband chose to marry, there's no guarantee you're going to stay together for a lifetime. Even though we make that commitment, and we might absolutely feel that at the moment we make that commitment, you don't know 100% of the time that you're going to be able to honor that throughout your whole life, or that your partner will. It's an unknown, and the reason that we all want control is because we're afraid. I will feel better, and I will be safe. This will make me safe, so I want things to unfold this way. And there isn't a being who doesn't face fear in some way of wanting things to unfold in a way that we recognize them, or a way that's going to be doable for us. We don't like surprises oftentimes because we feel out of control, or, oh, am I going to be okay? And that's all the workings of the ego. Also, that's another aspect of breathwork, is we get to quiet the ego and get into the higher self, which is the soul self, knowing that everything is okay, that I'm not this body, that I'm not this personality, that I'm so much more. I'm having this experience. I'm safe and flowing. I'm safe to learn from this experience. But the mind doesn't often give us that kind of freedom. So we need to work beyond the mind and into the spiritual self, which is even a spiritual practice for life, if you will.
Right.
And not necessarily through religion, but a spiritual aspect of ourselves, that we are here in a body. We are having lots of experiences. And they're not always controllable. We can do the best that we can, but like you said, we can't know everything that's going on inside someone else, even our children. The fact is, we can't even make our children happy. We can do things, we can teach them skills and tools to create their own happiness, but we cannot make them happy. That ended from the time they were, they're on our hip and we show them this, we bundle them around and we love and hug them and we give them food. But beyond that, when they start to grow and have their own experiences, we cannot guarantee they're going to be happy. And that's something we have to learn to accept. The only one that we can take care of an element of happiness is within ourselves, and taking on that mantle of responsibility to know self at that level. What do I need to feel well? Even happiness is a momentary experience. We can be happy because we woke up feeling pretty good in our bodies. The next day we might not feel so happy because we don't feel so energized, or we feel a pain somewhere in the body. Happiness can be a fleeting experience, but it's still looking for that even-keeled response to understanding what's going on and still moving forward. And so that also leads to what you're saying. Even the word suicide, you realize that word, just like the word divorce, it has a heavy frequency to it. It has a negative frequency to it because of all the meaning that we've placed on that, just that word. But if we look at it and say differently, how do you feel with the words, someone took their life or ended their life? It's a little bit different. How you feel, or how you feel in your belly, how you feel in your heart, and you realize this is all arbitrary due to what meaning we put on words. Right. And how they make us feel. So it's looking at it from a different aspect, part for healing as well, but just for a greater understanding of what can happen when we're here in these bodies and having these lifetimes, is that some people can feel like, I don't want to do this anymore. The pain can feel so great. They can also stop themselves from talking about it because they don't feel like that will help, or they feel embarrassment about how they feel. They haven't found a level of safety to talk about it or air it or ask for skills and tools, because sometimes the ego won't let them reveal that part of themselves, or that I don't know, I can't find my way, I need help.
Well, there's also not a lot of permission, is there, either? I mean, we're sort of taught from a very young age that there's happy and there's sad, and anything in between is sort of a big mystery. And, really there's a beautiful spectrum of emotions. And like you said, you can feel happy one minute and you might feel sad the next, and that's okay. And to learn to surf those emotions, which another one of my interviews, Raphael Kushner, talked about, and that it's okay. You're up on a wave and then you're down, and learning to be with that. And I think the great thing about the breath work is it really gives you this interesting sort of intimacy with yourself. I mean, before this happened to me, being in my head was very scary, because there's just thoughts going around that I didn't think I had control over. And it's not so much that you have control over them, is it? But it's that you don't have to attach yourself to them. You don't have to be in the midst of them. You can observe them. And I think the breath work and meditation, all these things give us that ability to be in the gap and to step further away and just watch them go by and say, oh yeah, there that is again. There's that word suicide. What do I really feel about that word, and how it is casting meaning on my life, and where can I step into, to create some light and levity in that. So it gives you the ability to kind of reframe things, doesn't it?
To be that witness. And we all need that. The normal range of emotion, there's a huge range of emotion, and we're here to experience all of it. Right. And we will experience all of it, because we will have thoughts about things, we will feel and see and hear and taste things. All of the senses give us a full-bodied experience. And then the mindset. And a lot of our mindset was given to us. It wasn't necessarily something we were born with. So then we're talking about also assessing, if I was given this view of suicide, or if I feel this way about it, where did that come from? Was I born with that? Was that something from my family? Was that something from my culture? Was that something from my religious practice? Does this serve me to still hold on to it? How does it make me feel? Right. So sometimes, and we don't do this just about this level of experience, we have to do it on every level in our lives, about something that we might be doing or experiencing, but asking ourselves, why do I have all these feelings about this? Is this me, or is this something I was taught or learned? And does it work for me? Does it help me in any way to stay plugged into some cultural views or some familial views? How is this working for me? Because sometimes we do have to unplug because it's a level of judgment that holds us back from our own healing or holds us back from experience the next range of emotion, which could be just peace with something. Because if we still have resistance to our saying it's bad or it's a sin or it's taboo or it's the end of the world, we will continue feeling that way, and that will stop the breath because we're feeling so much fear that unsafe, it's not okay, can't go on. And that will stop the healing process of even getting to the other side. The normal experience that we all have is emotion. The root word is motion. They're supposed to be in movement. But when we start judging ourselves for having an emotion, that kind of locks it in. Then we have some fear and embarrassment around it. And then we will hold on to that emotion a lot longer.
So it's kind of shifting from I shouldn't feel this way, which I think a lot of people live their life in that, in that water. I'm feeling this way, I shouldn't feel this way, I'm angry, I'm sad, or whatever that might be, and shifting into more of a curiosity of I am feeling this way, and why is that? And is that serving me long term to feel so judgmental about this, say a choice of suicide or anything really. And then you're able to come at it from a much more compassionate level of really, as you said earlier, having that open heart and stepping into the experience with just being and feeling and letting things go through you without the need to be afraid of it or to judge it or to try and control it, which I think ultimately it all kind of boils down to is that, that trying to control the uncertainty and just,
wanting safety again.
Right,
Right. That's part of our nature is we do want safety. We do have a fight or flight mechanism within ourselves that is very powerful and will help us when we need it. You need to run fast. You want your body to respond and be able to, have that flight response or fight if you need to in that moment of protecting self. But to live that way on a day-to-day basis can not be healthy for the body, not be healthy for the mind, and it doesn't allow for processing when we're in that lockdown state of just fear and the adrenals pumping all the time.
Right. And you can really feel that in people, can't you? I mean, I know just in my experience of talking to people about this topic, there's sort of when you bring up the word, just as you mentioned before, there's a, visceral reaction. You can see people either lean away, a lot of people lean in and they want to know more. But then even, if you hug somebody, you can feel that sort of just, there's kind of this frozenness, isn't there, of just this energy that's just sitting there. And the people who come in and hug you and they've got that sort of bear like wrap around you, you can tell that they move energy, that they're experiencing life on a different level, aren't they?
Yeah. They're breathing through it and they're allowing their shoulders to come down and still love. And you realize that big hug is just, I am committing to loving you.
Yeah.
What you've lived through, I understand. I understand how big it can be or how hard it can be. And I'm right here. That is what we're all hungry for.
Right.
Each and every one of us, even the one who feels stiff and feels unsure and feels frightened, is really hungering for a pathway to let the shoulders down and say, I just want to be loved too. I just want to know I'm safe too.
Right.
For some reason, that can seem so hard for us here, for all of us, because
why is that?
There's the mask, there's taught to show up, and it gets very complicated.
Why is that, though? Why is it so hard for us? I've tried to sort of look at my own journey through this and transitioning from that just absolute fear of, being vulnerable and sharing what's really here in my heart and getting it to travel from here out, in a way that is coming from my heart and not defensive and the other place that so often I think we speak from. But what is that fear of vulnerability, do you think, that really, I mean, I know, in my own experience, I've sort of figured it out, but what do you think that is, that people, is it rejection? People are just, people so clamor for that connection. They're so wanting to be seen and felt and heard, and yet crossing that chasm into, being vulnerable is just, it's tough.
It is tough. And I believe it comes from some early childhood experiences. Because you realize little ones aren't afraid of this. They're not afraid of who sees them crying, that they wanted that lollipop after dinner and they're not allowed to have it, or before dinner. They're not embarrassed that they're crying about what they want and they didn't have. They're not embarrassed about falling down and hurting their knee and crying. They're not embarrassed about saying, will you hug me? Will you hold me? They're just not. What we learn is when some of those experiences, we're looking, here's what I truly believe is, kids come into these bodies, we all come into these bodies being connected to something greater than ourselves. And it's not just mom and dad.
Right.
It's knowing that we're okay, that we're safe. We move through emotion, the range of emotions, so authentically and so instantaneously. We're like masters when we're children, with that, barring any traumatic experience. Then we start looking for all that love from these figures called mom and dad. And if they don't come in the timely manner in the way that we need them to, then we can start pocketing certain information, and our mind starts reading the information, but it starts reading it in a somewhat negative manner, or in a way of illusion. That if mom didn't hug me when I needed her to, or if she didn't respond the way I wanted her to, that means that I wasn't good. That means I didn't do it good enough to earn the love. Or that means that mom doesn't love me, or I'm not safe. So we start walking into these waters of illusion, and we start reading the data that's happening and then deciding, oh, that has to be about me. Rather than mom's having a hard day today, or mom's feeling something, or mom doesn't have a full bucket today. It's all about self. So then we grow and we still have this illusion about ourselves that somehow we're not good enough because we didn't get our needs met, or someone wasn't kind to us, or mom and dad couldn't treat us the way we really wanted to be treated. But we weren't born with that illusion. The first illusion, I think, is being in a body and feeling separate from even something higher than ourselves. Because we were just in all that love, floating in it. And oftentimes that's the experience you can have in breathwork, is what is it like to be completely connected to something greater than yourself and be absolutely filled with that love. Every cell of your being, every particle of your consciousness filled with love. It's a stunning experience. But that is where I believe we all came from before we got into the body.
Right.
So once we get into the body, we have this thing called the ego, who's always vying for safety and to get its needs met. And if they aren't met, we can feel really uncomfortable about that. And then we learn as we age to hide that. That's called the mask that we put on. Oh yeah, I'm okay, I'm okay. Yeah, I don't do that job. Yeah, I don't need it. No, I already know. And it's a protective mechanism, because you can't see how my little secret is that I'm afraid I'm not worthy or deserving. And I don't know that there's any one of us that walk this earth that doesn't have at some moment some fear of that. Or if they don't, they've done a lot of work to work through that and to remember a connect and say, I am worthy and deserving. I am more than good enough. I am love.
Right.
And connecting to something higher than ourselves, I believe that's the meditation practice, the breath work. It's what allows us to feel filled again, to then step forward and say, I care. That's that big bear hug that you receive. That's that person who is knowing and has more than enough to hand out because they're already feeling filled. They're already seeing their way through the illusion and can offer some out to someone else because there's plenty.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. Well, so on that, then let's talk about an actual breath work experience, kind of, what I've done with you, which when I say breath work to people, they always get a confused look on their face, like, what? And it's so sad that we actually have to it's almost like relearning how to breathe in a way, isn't it?
It is.
I know the first time I did it was with a woman, and it was so deep and so intense, but I'd love to walk through kind of what happens, because you start out, taking in these very deep breaths. And I have always found that to be very uncomfortable, those first few minutes of breathing in and breathing in, because there's kind of a transition the body goes through, which maybe it's the letting go that I'm not comfortable with. I'm not sure. But every time I've done it, I always spend those first couple of minutes going, oh gosh, this is going to be this hard.
I don't really want to do this.
I don't want to do it. Yeah, I resist it. And then sort of something happens and there's a transition into, oh wow, you feel your whole body kind of becoming oxygenated, and there's a real freedom there. And then of course, you become overtaken by, or sometimes tetany, which is getting less and less for me now. The first time I was absolutely frozen. I mean, my arms, like you said, weighed 1,000 pounds. I couldn't have gotten off that table and run, if a fire came through to save my life. There was no way. And I think it was just so much emotional trauma through my body. And then I could actually feel it leaving. I mean, there is that process. So I'd love for you to kind of walk through what happens and how, what that would look like for somebody who's never heard of it or never done it before. And then, what the transition afterwards, because it's so lovely at the end when you just really feel all that energy moving out. And there's sort of a sense of spaciousness in your body that, like there's more space in there, literally, right?
Exactly. Because there's that letting go and there's that processing. There's also that connection that happens, or connecting upward. So the first part, what I usually let people know is they're going to feel something on all three levels. So there's the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual. And I start with the physical because usually that's what can push our buttons or make us feel uncomfortable, is when we start feeling something that doesn't feel good in the body. You get someone's attention immediately that way.
Yeah.
So just like if we get diseased or we start feeling pain, we'll know we need to start taking care of ourselves. But we can learn to live with daily emotional pain. That seems to be easier. But physical pain gets a little harder. So the first level is when we're taking in breath at this level, we are moving out that heavy, dense energy. And it's time to move it out. It's time for that healing. If we keep it in day after day after day, this is the roots and the beginnings of disease in the body, being dis-at-ease in the body, because we've been dis-at-ease in our emotions for so long. So the moving out and the processing happens through taking in breath, and we're taking deep breaths. It's belly and chest are rising and falling with each breath. And there's two ways. It can be mouth breathing, or it can be in through the nose and out through the mouth. This is also not something to be attempted when you're by yourself. You need a breath facilitator.
Yeah, good
because
point.
the breath work at this level is so intense that it can take us into some memory planes that, even past life experiences. And you want someone there that can help you guide through them, maneuver through them with safety and with your emotional stability too, in case you go into some of those arenas. Because it's very important, and it can be very big. Even some things that we might have experienced as children that we didn't allow ourselves to see because we needed shelter, we needed a barrier from that. It didn't feel safe. So it is very important to have someone there with you while you're doing this.
Yeah, good point.
And so part of it is starting to open up. And when you said, and you identified so greatly, the ego can step in and say, I don't want to do this. This feels uncomfortable. It is really the ego that has been in charge so much of the time of, I don't want to go to this place. I'm comfortable the way I am. This feels uncomfortable. I don't want to let go. The ego has to die a death in some way in breath work. It's no longer in control. The monkey chatter that goes on 24 hours a day, even in our dream state, it stops. It calms down with the breath work at this level. Just like when we deep, slow breathe, we don't feel anxiety anymore because the brain has calmed down. It's no longer spitting out thought after thought of anxiety creating thoughts. So when we first start, it is learning how to let go of the ego's tight clamp. And so that's why some thoughts will come in, we'll read our body, we'll feel tense, we just don't like it, and we'll feel a little ornery. But you breathe beyond that point, and you're choosing. So now you're already switching from the ego to the soul self, saying, I'm choosing this experience. I'm choosing to let go. I'm choosing my freedom. And you breathe beyond that point, and then you will feel the experience physically. You'll feel heaviness in the arms and legs. That is the exit points for all the heaviness of the emotions. You can feel the body temperature change. You can feel, this is a breathing like we do when we start to work out. So naturally, you feel a little heat in the body. But as we go further into breath work, what we can find is, I'm not so attached and identified with this body, so the body temperature can actually plummet and feel really cold. So blankets are a part of it too, just to keep us warm and keep us focused on the breathwork experience itself. And then the next part is tetany. And tetany can happen. Tetany is not only exclusively with the hands as well. Sometimes people feel tetany in their legs. They don't like where they're standing in life. Yeah, the jaw. If we have a lot of tension in our jaw, we can, if we clench and grind our teeth at night, we can feel a lot of tetany in the jaw. And all of a sudden the mouth can feel very narrow while we're breathing, and it just doesn't open necessarily. Sometimes people feel it, this tension through the chest area because they've held on to so much fear. And the hands are very, very common for our hands can feel like claws all of a sudden. And we don't recognize them. We're thinking, what is happening to my body? But in actuality, it's the consciousness of what we've lived and what we've held in there so quietly and so for so long that is finally allowing some movement. And this is what it feels like. This is what it's felt like on the inside, but now we're getting it to the surface level and moving it on through. And then emotionally, we'll have some emotion come up. And oftentimes I'll tell people what they might experience, and I can tell a lot of them are saying, that won't happen to me. I won't have any of that. And when you're having men in here and saying, you might experience some tears, you might experience some vulnerability, you might experience some sadness, and that's just okay. And the men are already thinking, I'm not going to cry in here. I don't even know you. And then having that experience, the tears just naturally flow because we're feeling the exquisiteness of looking back over life or acknowledging ourselves, even as little ones. And so what I do in breath work is I'm also doing some body mapping on the body. So I'm working on the hips, I'm working on the chest, I'm working on the shoulders. And in that, our pockets of energy in our hips, we're dealing with our little child.
Yeah.
A little girl, a little boy stuff. Did they feel loved? Did they feel responded to? Did they feel safe? Just having people bring up an image of themselves as a child and watching what happens to their face. Their eyes are closed, but they're looking at themselves deep inside and acknowledging that little one that they haven't acknowledged, they've learned not to acknowledge over the years. It's a very powerful experience in breath work. And then having tears flow just because we forgot. We forgot they were even there. And it's an amazing, magical moment to have them meet their inner child and just realize they are there and they were good enough. They were perfect. Just a little girl, a little boy. And then moving into the chest. We carry a lot of fear behind the heart. The heart can be the first thing that clenches. I don't know. I'm not sure. And moving through that fear, even moving into committing to love the self, that I'm worthy and deserving of my own love. We have two different sides to us. We have the right side, the left side. The right side is our masculine side, and each one of us have a masculine and a feminine. And the point is to get them into balance. So our right side is our relationship with everyone else, and our left side is our feminine side. That's our relationship with ourselves. So there can be a difference about how we feel when I'm pushing on certain levels of the body. The left side is about loving self. The right side is I freely and fully express my love to others. Do we feel safe to tell other people we love them? Do we feel frightened it won't be returned? Do we feel frightened our love isn't good enough? Is that an experience we had as a child? We tried to love mom and dad, but they kind of pushed us away. And therefore we thought, oh, my gift of love isn't good enough because they didn't want it. And so there's so many experiences that we have as children that we internalize and misinterpret based on how someone else is responding to us. So therefore it can make it scary to love other people or feel like our love is worthy and deserving. And then the shoulders are moving into forgiveness. And, the right shoulder is forgiving those who we might still feel like they hurt us, whether it was a mate, whether it was our mother and father, maybe it was a family member, maybe it was a sibling. And watching what happens when just gently pushing into that tissue and saying the words, I forgive. I forgive mom, I forgive dad. I know they were doing their very best, the best that they knew how to do. That can vault us into a place of just the release of the tears of acknowledging who they really were and their own struggle. Their struggle to be the loving people that they truly are, because that's their identity. If it's our identity, that's their identity. What was their experience as children growing up? How did they learn to be the way that they are? How did they learn to stay back so far behind a barrier? And, not speak openly or lovingly, not allow things. How did they learn to be so frightened and controlling?
Yeah.
And our mates, I have worked with many couples and many families over the years, and I have never met one who on their wedding day said, I'm going to get them. We were all marrying, hoping in our hearts that this would be the most loving experience, that we would finally have this love that we didn't have when we were younger.
Right.
We're just putting it all on this one person, that this is our big opportunity for love. And oftentimes we find we don't have the skills and tools to build our vision of love. It wasn't modeled for us by mom and dad. The authenticity, the vulnerability, the loving ourselves and therefore loving someone else, how to create safety within intimacy, all of those things we've learned to kind of hold back and, hold all this kind of in a hidden basket, and that doesn't lead to intimacy. So we oftentimes can have a disappointment or a feeling of being let down or a deep sadness, a grief that I didn't live what I really wanted in my marriage.
Well, and isn't it true too, Karen, that, I look back at when I got married, which I was quite young, just turned 24. I always have so many friends, we all kind of got married around the same age, and I think it's almost like we're marrying paper mache versions of ourselves, right? Because at that stage, I did not know myself at all. And I'd spent all those years, covering myself up with, as much armor as I could. And getting married, I think you're right. We stood on that altar and I thought, oh, this will be it. This is where I'll finally find that, acceptance and everything else. But I wasn't really even who I truly was. I didn't even have that, sort of knowing or that access. It took many years after that for me to really, start to understand that. So it's so interesting when you think about people getting married at that, young age when, I would hope that maybe today that people would know themselves better, but I don't know if that's true. I don't know if the younger generation has got more consciousness than we had. Maybe there's more permission for it, but it feels like, I think a lot of people just go into it very misguided.
I think we all go into it guided with love, which is who we are. And yet I think, again, it can be misinterpreted just like it was when we were children. Is that we can lose the opportunity to feel compassion and feel forgiveness and feel understanding. Is that a lot of the experience can be frightening,
right.
Uncertainty, confusion, pain, anger, and that's kind of what we experienced when we were younger as well. Right. So a part of it, we can also have the joy and the happiness and all of those things, but we don't necessarily focus on those moments. We tend to focus on the negative moments to define the whole experience or to define ourselves. It's funny how the ego can step in and take perhaps positive feedback and can take negative feedback, but it might harbor the negative feedback, worrying that, oh my God, but this review said this, or this person said this to me. This person might have loved me just the way I am, but this one is really what's playing in my mind over and over again.
Yeah.
And so the whole purpose of relationship is actually to know ourselves. We think that it's so much about knowing the other person or having this experience. The experience is within us. Relationship happens, like you said. You attract in your partner and you're marrying your husband, and in some ways they are a reflection of us. This is how we're going to gaze in the mirror and finally get to know ourselves, because we didn't know ourselves. How can a candle, if it's the only one lit in the room, how can it know itself unless there's another candle lit in the room and it can gaze at that one to say, oh, I see my flame, or I see my stem, I see the fullness of me. We see the things that we like about ourselves in someone. That's the first experience is, oh, you're just like me, and isn't it wonderful? And I see all the things in me that I love, and I see them in you, and we're meant to be together. And the other side is, oh, there's some other things that are there too. Some other things that I don't like as much. And while we might focus on them in the other person, if we can name them, it's because they exist in us too. So that's the deeper work is, thank you for being my mirror. I also have that, and how is that still working for me?
Right.
Could I do some work to clean that out? Do I want to? Is that still serving me to have that doubt or fear or that behavior that's there? And this is where we get into the meaty work of relationship, is knowing about ourselves. And it's big work. They say that's the fastest pathway to enlightenment is marriage.
Yeah, I think it definitely can be. And I think it's interesting because so one way to know the self would be through a relationship, marriage, and then another way to get to know the self is obviously going through these traumas and tragedies that we have.
Absolutely.
And suicide being one of the biggest. You mentioned to me that you have worked with some people who have had that experience, and I'd be interested in just maybe you could share a little bit about using the breath work to navigate this aftermath, and the importance really of using this time to honor yourself and to know where you stand in this experience, because I think that's so important for people to really get is to give themselves permission to do that and to really honor this experience, because it can sweep you away and your whole life can just become something that revolves around that moment. And for me, I know when it happened, I really made this commitment and intention that I didn't want it to become the defining moment for my children in a negative way. I knew it was going to be something that would be a part of their lives, forever in a way, but I didn't want it to be that thing that just, you meet so many people who their loved one committed suicide, took their life 20, 30 years ago, and they've never spoken of it. It's just this frozen event in their life that sits there that they're kind of tethered to, and nobody's ever really been able to move away from that. So I'd be curious, just your experience with working with these people, how you've gone through that with them.
And the first part is just what you said, is the ability to have safety to look at this, to even say the words, and then to deal with whatever comes up. Mm-hmm. Sometimes tears come up right away when it is shared. Oh, this is my experience. This was a member of my family. Mm-hmm. And just sitting with that. It's okay. Release the tears. Let it come up and out. Okay, and let's look at this again. Let's look at how you have been trained to hold on to this experience, how you've been trained to think about it. Is that really true? Mm-hmm. Is that true that that's bad? Is that true that that person's not an okay person? Does that make you not an okay person? Working through, sifting through some of the junk that just got clogged, because it really is that. It's non-truths, they are illusions, and they clog our pathway to our own health and vibrancy again. And so part of it is just picking apart and taking apart the pieces that got, or threads, I like to look at them, and the threads got tangled into a big knot. So if we can take them apart and start looking at them differently, suddenly there's a sense of freedom of, oh my gosh, I never looked at it that way. Because we're not taught to look at it that way. We're taught to look at it one linear, narrow pathway, to look at the event of suicide, what we call suicide. And if you even take away the cat, which is the name, and you look at it more simplistically, this is a being, a soul who came here in a body, who had some experiences, who they didn't know how to handle them. And nothing felt like it was a pathway to a sense of being okay, or a sense of safety, a sense of stability, whatever you want to say. And they were feeling inundated. They didn't want to do this anymore. Sometimes that has happened through even accidental means, that we call it suicide, even through an overdose of drugs. It doesn't mean that every being chose to do that.
Right.
It can be that, something started to go in, and then they're not aware of what exactly is going to happen, and here's an outcome. But a sense of instability emotionally was probably there in the first place, of feeling like inundation. I don't know what to do.
Overwhelmed, right.
Yeah. And a lot of people now that are going to get help, I think those that are in the position to give them help are doing their best too, but oftentimes it is a prescription. And sometimes that's not leading to the deeper sense of well-being, of how to deal with life or make changes that are necessary for a feeling of safety, even helping people work through old emotions that have been there for a long time. Medication is a good bridge, but we've still got to be doing the work to cross the bridge, and sometimes it can help us when things feel really, really dark. But we still need to do the work to help us get out of that darkness. And so it's helping people to understand it's not just the cap word or description of this act, which is suicide. It's the understanding and the compassion for what was this person living. And did they feel like they could go anywhere? Did they feel like anything was there for them? And it's not the responsibility of all the family members. It's just looking at this person and what was their experience. Can we get out of our own and just, oh, of course I understand. Through compassion, my heart's open. I feel it. And that leads us to just an acceptance. The more that we have compassion, the more that we can open the door to forgiveness, because sometimes we do have judgment about things, or it hurt us, or we felt sad, and so we're angry that they hurt us, or that they made us feel sad. Then that can lead to forgiveness, which is ultimate pathway to freedom. And then a higher pathway into absolution, which is, what if they didn't do anything wrong? What if everything was just okay? And this was their pathway, this lifetime, this is what they chose. And if that is that forgiveness and that compassion is also a possibility, what that will bring us as the people in this experience as well. Because then we're taking away the darkness that we're even putting on that person for taking this choice or having this experience. We're taking it away from ourselves. Then there's more of an avenue for light to come in, more possibility, like you said, the word space. We have more space to breathe. We have more space to have joy today. If we're having compassion and understanding and forgiveness for anyone in our life who's having their life experience, rather than making it all through judgment, our own experience, or bad or wrong, or pushing it away. It's that compassion really is the key to opening our hearts and feeling our own identity, which is love. If we have compassion, we can love again.
So true.
That's what has been the opening skill and tool for dealing with any of the people who who are so brave and so willing to say, I don't want to carry this anymore, but I don't know what to do with it. Looking different ways on how to allow some opening to happen again, because it felt so closed and it felt like a big, dark, heavy box that they've been carrying around for a long time. And I think through those means, there's freedom again.
Well, and that's an interesting point. I did a workshop recently that included breath work, and there was a couple people in there who actually had, both of them had parents who had taken their lives when they were quite young. And one woman had never, literally never talked about it. Just, it was something, and so it came up because my story, was shared, and we talked about it. And when she did the breath work, it was interesting. I think there's so much fear in talking about these things because people, of all the things you've been talking about, all the beliefs and the judgments and everything else that come up for us. But breath work, it's almost a, I don't want to say it's a shortcut, because it's not a shortcut, but it almost is alleviating this heaviness without you having to talk about it in a way, isn't it? Like there's so many emotional wounds in there and so many beliefs. And when she started on the first day, it was a 3-day workshop, there was just this tightness. And then after doing the breath work, the expression, how much she softened without, and she made the comment, it just felt so good to kind of feel this energy leaving the body. So in a way, I hadn't really thought about that, but the breath work almost kind of allows you to maybe advance forward quicker than having to sit there and talk about it and think about it, if that's something that's
allows you to know how powerful the mind is to keep control, right? Yeah. Because that's, foremost, she was probably feeling, I always have to be controlled about this. I can't just let myself cry about this, or I might not ever stop crying. The mind has all kinds of tricks that it plays on us to hold this back. And then you have this opening through the breath work. And the breath work is actually helping us to process at a much faster rate, that which can take years to process just with our own mental machinations, or even going through typical modalities of just thinking about it. Thinking about it is important, that we shift our mind, because to not recreate the pain or the sadness or the darkness we've held around something. However, the breath work is an acceleration of an experience of healing that makes it so much faster on all 3 levels. There's the emotional, there's the physical, and there's the spiritual. And so whether it's a suicide, whether it's a relationship, whether it's change in our life that frightened us, whether it's just a moment in our life where we're doubting self or our ability to move forward, breath work is really helping to move that energy so rapidly to where we feel like we remember what it's like again to be free of all of this that we've been thinking about it. And sometimes the meaning behind it is so big it can't be held in the thinking thought. It's so much bigger than that. And that is the aspect through EFT and breath work, is gaining this freedom that it's not what I've been thinking. All track of our mind was created when we were little, and oftentimes there's very few original thoughts that are coming in. So we're recreating this
same thing.
Yeah, little circle of experience and thought and motion, therefore.
Right.
And this way, it starts shifting everything because it's so much greater. We break out of that small little track.
Yeah, so important. I hadn't thought about it that way, but it really is almost a shortcut into being able to have that perspective, because you suddenly have this space. I feel like doing the breath work just has given me so much more space inside, when you feel that energy moving out. And I think that's really important when you're going through this, and also being open to seeing things in a different way, which the word suicide, just the connotations and all of these archaic beliefs around it and everything, I think it is time that we start holding it up to the light and really kind of seeing it through different prisms and letting different thought patterns come into it, so that there isn't so much fear and judgment around it.
Exactly, because that's the first thing that will close us down, is judgment.
Yeah.
It starts to shut and even stop the breath, which is the very thing that we need to be living in these bodies and flowing and being healthy ourselves. So it's very interesting how the mind can shut off the very thing we need the most or want the most.
Yeah, so sad too. I mean, really just, I have this theory about, this whole epidemic that the planet is experiencing. And, I think people today, I know a lot of the people I've spoken to just feel this tremendous sense of sort of disconnection. And so I wonder, in this vein, Karen, with the work that you do, the message I think suicide is asking of us is to look at the way we're connecting with ourselves or not connecting with ourselves, and the way we're connecting with other people. And, really begging us to kind of step back and see how we could do it differently. And so with that sort of idea in mind, how can breath work? I mean, you've already beautifully summed it up in a lot of ways, but how do you see people being able to utilize breath work to really kind of create that for themselves?
I believe it happens because it allows us another experience of ourselves. Most of the time in our culture, here, certainly in the West, we're a very outward-facing culture. It's about productivity. What have you done today? Who are you? What do you own? What are you doing? And all of those things can be great experiences. It's not like they're bad. However, when that's the major focus of our life, we're losing the peace and the love and the fulfilled nature that already exists within ourselves, doing absolutely nothing. The being part of ourselves. We're missing the being. If we don't also, and I think there is a huge movement towards this too, of checking inside. You hear it more mainstream now through yoga, meditation, breathing, being still. There's networks now that are just based on a more spiritual practice, not necessarily even a religion, but just the practice of being.
Right.
Of recognizing self. When we're recognizing self, we're also recognizing something greater than ourselves and that connection to it. I believe that breath work can also be one of the great tools to help us go inside at that level and remember that, of course, we're good enough. Our biggest fear is sitting still and looking inward because we're afraid we haven't done enough to earn the love. We're afraid we're not good enough. Maybe we didn't do well enough in school, or we're not earning enough money, or we're not beautiful enough, or whatever it is that we've been told by our culture or our families, or these, silent little messages and sometimes not so silent messages. And that will help us to overcome the greatest fear that we've had, is somehow, I can't stop and look inside. I'm afraid of what I'll find. But in actuality, what you'll find is something so great. And it helps us get over that hurdle of fear to look inside and feel compassion, feel love, recognize ourselves, even feel for that little child that's within us. Our hearts, we have to trust our hearts. We have loving hearts. You see a child and you'll just see them and love them. You see our own child and learn to love them. Feel that expression for that little being. Because in the breath, it's different than if we're sitting here and looking at a picture of ourselves. We can replay thoughts about, that period in our life or how others saw us. But in the breath, it's opening you up to your soul self, where you're expanded, you are conscious, you are loving, you are forgiving, you are compassionate. And all of those higher teachings are naturally within us. So in the breath work, you have an experience of looking at that child of self, that picture of self, and you just feel so much tenderness, feel so much that we're broken open again.
Right.
Broken open in our heart sense to love again, to feel peaceful. At the end of breath work, you feel what it's like to just be right here and be okay with being right here. You don't have to do anything anymore. You don't have to earn it. It's already done. You're just peaceful and right here. And that is important in all of our lives, to feel peace again. It's not even just the happiness. It's to feel peaceful and feel what it's like to feel still and go, and everything's okay.
Yeah. That tenderness is such a great word. I think that was probably, I know in my experiences working with you, just at the end of it, there's just that sense of feeling like, oh my God, I am finally home. Like it's okay for me to be here and not run away. And, just there is an overwhelming sense of calm and just knowing that you're all right, which is something I've never felt before. I think with the breath work, there was that sense of peace afterwards, and then also the crying. When you're crying during this breath work, I've never had any experience like that. Every single time, the tears are coming. It's not, there's partly from a place of sadness, but there's also just from a place of exquisite beauty. It's sort of like you finally
missing that place of yourself. Because
Yes.
you've been longing. I believe since we've gotten into these bodies, we've been longing for that love. We've looked through all of our relationships. But really, it's already inside self. We just didn't know how to access it.
Right.
And that exquisiteness is recognizing I am the love. There's plenty. It's not that it's lacking. It's not that you have to work hard for it. It's already here. And we just didn't know we had everything we needed for this journey inside.
Right.
It's one of my favorite things to tap with, is to recognize I'm safe to be here. I'm safe to be here in my body. I'm safe to be here on this earth having this experience. I have everything I need for this journey inside. And when you're tapping on those meridians, or you're saying this in breath work and helping everyone in through a level of consciousness, when they're breathing and that open to put in truth again, it is stunning what we can experience again, which is just self, completely connected, right here in a body.
Right here in a body. So strange, isn't it? How we live in these bodies and we get older and older, and yet most people really don't have any concept of. I think we spend more time figuring out what kind of TV we want to buy or what kind of car we want to buy than we ever really do, to think about, how do I want to live in my body, and what is this vehicle and this vessel for, and how can I create, that sense of peace and everything else. I mean, clearly we're just never taught it, so it's something that's very easy to get.
For us to now, you have to search for it to find, to even learn it. It's not taught in our schools, unfortunately, but that's part of where this change is heading, is how do we help our young? How do we bring breath work into schools as part of their curriculum? Right. Or yoga? And I know that there can be, a dissension against that, thinking it's a religion. It's a practice of breath, movement that allow us to access peace, health, which we're all deserving of. And this also helps to shift our relationship with all of those things, which can be a huge distraction to the inner self, whether it's a television or a car or a house, or what's the next thing we think we need to buy to be happy. It never reaches that inner place. It always leads to more. But going into this place, you feel so filled and so satisfied that none of those things can ever touch. And learning how to do that, I think, is essential for each and every one of us.
Yeah, so important. And particularly, and everybody's going to encounter loss, on some level. And it may not be a suicide, it may be something else, divorce, or, losing the relationship. But we all are going to encounter it. And I think the more that one can shore themselves up with these kinds of practices, you're able to weather these storms and return to yourself quicker and integrate, rather than having it sitting out here festering and, ultimately controlling your life in a way.
Exactly.
So.
Still love. Still be a powerful creator in your own life, which is what we came here for.
It's what we came here for. Exactly. So, well, this has been so enlightening. I'm so glad that we had this time together, Karen. Thank you so much. If people want to find you, where are you? Where can they find Karen Winter?
Well, they can find my connection on my website, which is recreatingfamilies.com.
Okay.
So my number's on there, my email's on there. My email is karen@recreatingfamilies.com. So I teach breathwork every Friday night, and then I see clients one-on-one through practice of EFT and just reworking our consciousness through Monday through Friday. So they can reach me easily.
Perfect. Great. Well, I would encourage anyone who's interested in pursuing this and finding out a little bit more about breathwork to check out Karen's work, because it made a huge difference for me, and I think it's something that is just a great tool for yourself, for your children, and I highly encourage it. So anyway, well, thank you so much for joining us, Karen, and I hope everyone enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much. All right, bye.
Bye, Diana.